Hello and welcome back to the GoLoud sessions. On today's episode, we meet James O'Hagan, LGBT Champions Programme Manager for LGBT Ireland and host and creator of the very first GoLoud Podship winner, Invisible Threads. Enjoy. James, Invisible Threads has been a long time coming. We are privy to that information, obviously, because we've been working so closely on it.
Yes.
But for anyone who isn't familiar, maybe do you want to bring people up to speed as to where the idea for Invisible Threads came from?
Yeah, absolutely. So early last year, I switched into a new role in LGBT Ireland, the national LGBT organisation. And that role there was around, I suppose we were trying to train and create awareness within health and social care settings, particularly for older people, of the needs of older LGBT people. And my role was not really to be that much front facing. It was to be working directly with the health professionals, delivering training. We had a network of around 140 people around the country that I was to be working with to help make sure that those services were inclusive. And when the pandemic hit, obviously suddenly those health and social care professionals working in older people services, like the most unattainable group of people in the entire country for training. And there were so many additional, there was so much additional work for health and social care professionals at that point that we just realized that we weren't going to be able to touch them, and we needed to figure out what we could continue to do. And we knew that older people in the LGBT community were very marginalized and isolated. And we'd seen research that we understood how vulnerable they were. And at a time when older people in general were being pushed into this kind of isolation, we just realized, right, well, we need to try and offer as much support as we could. And so I pivoted my role then into offering a sort of a support group. We created a support group. The Older and Bolder online community quickly grew to around 200 members. And through offering twice weekly coffee mornings, with 10 to 15 people coming into each one, just chatting to the people who were coming in, getting to talk about the super mundane things, like about how frustrating it was to try and get down to the shops to do your shopping when you're cocooning, but then also getting into hearing about kind of their journey to coming out, hearing about kind of the reaction of their families, hearing about their fears around going into nursing homes or healthcare settings, or even just like coming out to new people. And I suppose the wit and charm and humor of everyone that I was meeting, I just coming from a sort of a podcast background where I had previously done a podcast which was all around sharing stories, my own stories around coming out and finding acceptance of myself in many ways. I just realized that people needed to hear these stories, that people needed to see this population, and I needed to make it more visible and whatever I could do. So I had this idea germinating kind of in the back of my mind when someone sent me I can't even remember who it was now. They'll never get their full pride, but they sent me on the link to the GoLoud Podship, and I sat with that and I was just like, this feels like a really good idea. It feels like a really good idea. And this feels like a brilliant platform and like an absolutely amazing opportunity to amplify the voices of these people. So I just, at that stage, I was like, right, I have to go for this. I think that the idea is good, and I think that this opportunity is too good to pass up. So that's where the idea came from, and how I ended up kind of scribbling an application. I think I was like literally like day of the thing closed. I was like scribbling away to get it submitted into you guys.
How did you select your contributors? And I suppose, did you go into it with an idea of the kind of topics and issues you wanted to cover, or did that come from meeting the contributors and hearing their stories?
So I suppose it was a bit of both in a way. I had gotten to know a couple of people through the group, through the coffee mornings quite well, and I knew that they had very interesting backstories, and I knew that I definitely wanted to speak to them, but I wanted to make sure that there was a diverse representation, because the LGBT community is incredibly diverse, and it encompasses people from all areas of society. And I wanted to try and make sure that this particular group represented as much of that as possible. So I had 2 or 3 people that I'd met through the group, and I had a couple of other people who I'd worked with before. I'd say Lucia Fitzgerald, she is I think she's the first podcaster. She's the first episode, and she is she's an Irish woman born in a Magdalen laundry, then fled to Manchester when it was discovered she was a lesbian, lived on the streets, had this absolutely outstanding life. I knew of her through attending other events and seeing the work that she'd done, and just felt that I needed to tell that story of kind of that real sort of strict Ireland, that where people had to leave, and also to talk about her activism. And so I wanted a mix of people who had been involved in the struggle for gay rights and in the struggle. I wanted the big story about the gay rights story of people who had been part of that, but I also wanted to represent that more internal struggle that goes on. So I needed that diversity, and to show that there was people out there in the front line, and there was people who were struggling within themselves, and I suppose make it as relatable as possible.
So obviously when we'd announced the GoLoud Podship, the bursary for podcasters for an original podcast series idea, we did not anticipate a global pandemic happening. And I'm sure neither did you, and especially given the subject matter and the content, there was a lot of challenges, I would imagine, in recording remotely and in general, just bringing the whole thing together. How did you overcome those challenges?
Sort of just my usual approach to things that appear overwhelming is to sort of stand back crying and weeping for a period of time, going, I'll never be able to do it, and then finally just be like, no, okay, figure it out. So you're right, the initial idea would have been that I would have gone to sit with the individuals, and I would have had that in-person conversation. And I think even I remember when I was talking to you guys during the interview process, that was a large part of what I said was important, was that you had that real bond when you're sitting with someone and you're getting that intimate kind of a connection. And we had hoped when I was selected, I had hoped that towards the end of the year we'd be in a position to be able to do that. As it became clearer and clearer and clearer that wasn't going to be the case, I actually started to think about, well, actually this could even be more of a it could be part of the story, is that they are being told over the phone. There is that remoteness to it. It links it back into the year we're having, and also links it back in, I suppose, somewhat to the disconnect or the remoteness that these people felt in their lives as they were sort of coming to terms with who they were. But it was a learning curve for me in trying to figure out how to record things remotely, figuring out how to sort of edit things, although my edit job was so amazingly the choppy editing that I managed to hand in was so beautifully tailored by the guys in GoLoud to make it sound so perfect. But yeah, it was a learning curve, but at the end of the day it was kind of one where I was just like, I need to figure out a way to do this, because this is too important. Because I also knew that I could have gone back to you guys at any point and been like, look, this isn't going to be possible in this situation. And the flexibility was there to be kind of like, right, well, we'll just push it out until it is able to. But I was like, no, it's important that these stories are told, and they're told sooner rather than later. So once I got that into my mind, just figuring out what I needed to do, being able to ask for help and support when I needed, talking to other friends of mine who do podcasts about kind of what I should do, and just bringing it all together and just hoping for the best a little bit.
We had this question in on Instagram from Stephen Hackett. He asked, did making the podcast impact any of your views or change your mindset in relation to LGBTQ plus life?
Yeah, it really did. It was I suppose that I hadn't maybe, it was something that I'd started changing within my mindset right from when I'd started in LGBT Ireland, because I think that there is such an invisibility with older LGBT people, that they are at the fringes of society. There can be, there can be a double invisibility around women within the LGBT community. Then there can sometimes be negative association with older gay men, and you have all this swimming around you. And I think it really, first and foremost, it sort of solidified in me the importance of the journey that these people have bring on, and how important that every LGBT person, that whether they were out or not, or whether they were out publicly or whatever, in bringing us to where we are now, and how much we owe these people, and how important it is, even if you only get to be yourself for one day of your life, even if you arrive in a nursing home and suddenly you say, I need to be you deserve to be able to have that opportunity. There's no time. there's no sort of there's no point, there's no time at which it's too late to come out. And I think that's one of the things that I really kind of came across, because you have this kind of feeling of, oh, you know, you come out as a teenager, but then like, oh, if I'm like in my 20s, it's too late. If I'm in my 30s, it's too late. There's always a reason why maybe you feel like you shouldn't. But I just think that seeing the relief that some of these older people I spoke to felt about coming out even much later in life, and how it had like one of them said, Tom Kavanagh, one of the interviewers said in our conversation, how until you've not been yourself for a very long time, you don't understand how powerful it is to be yourself. And doing this really helped me understand the importance of that, because before I think I had been a little bit flaky in that camp of like, oh, you know, people come out if they want to come out, or people don't come out if they don't want to come out, and that's all kind of like a personal choice. But I understood how important it is for people to feel they can come out, and how many people hold themselves back from coming out because of fear, and how we need to make everyone aware it's safe. We're a safe place for you to be who you are, and who you are is valued and wanted within our community.
This is probably going to be a hard question and potentially slightly unfair, but I ask everyone. So I'm going to give you the same honor. If you had to pick a highlight from the series for you, what would it be and why?
So I could go like sort of, you know, vague and talk about kind of like how the highlight of the series was like seeing going further than I thought I would be able to in terms of like the technical side of things. But that is a really tough question. Like if I'm going to go and talk about, say, the people I spoke to, everyone's story, like I think that a highlight for me really was the trust that the 8 individuals put in me and placed in me to tell these stories. And even though it's only just come out a week ago, the reaction to it, and the reaction we're getting through our services in LGBT Ireland, and hearing people reaching out to us and saying, I heard someone talking about Invisible Threads on Pat Kenny, or I heard an ad for Invisible Threads, you know, and I've decided now that I want to reach out, I want to ask for that support. And I think that was the highlight I wanted, and it's the highlight that I got.
Very diplomatic, very fair answer. What would you want people to get out of the series from listening to it?
I think that there's two things that I think I'd like people to take away from it. First is on a more general sort of, you know, remove it from the LGBTQ community, remove it from that. Just the power of being yourself, the importance of being yourself, the peace that comes when you just are able to be who you are without having to second guess, or without having to try and put on a facade, you know. So I think that because everyone, regardless of gender, sexuality, we all are guilty of kind of second guessing ourselves, and maybe sort of putting a fake foot forward if we feel that it's sort of what other people want. And I think that, you know, listening to these stories should just really reassure people of the importance of being yourself. And then I think within the LGBTQ community, I just hope that it creates an awareness and a visibility of older members of our community, and it broadens the way in which we include them out beyond just kind of, you know, liking pictures of Stonewall, or talking about, you know, kind of the past, and talking about the dream, and a real authentic intergenerational inclusion of older people within our community, and a celebration of their contribution. And the final, and I've thought of another thing off the top of my head, I do think that it's so important that people who hear it, who may be struggling with their sexuality or with their gender identity, and may be that bit older in life, feel comforted by hearing the stories of other people who've been in the same place as they are, and maybe see a bit of a light towards being able to find a way to being the most authentic version of themselves, and know that there is a place where they'll be valued and loved for who they are.
For anyone who's looking for support, or perhaps more information on the work that yourself and LGBT Ireland do, where can people find out more?
So if anyone is looking for support, I would say first and foremost is check out our website, lgbt.ie. We have information around there's online chat support. We have lists of all of our online and face-to-face peer support groups, which are available throughout the month. We operate the transgender family support line on 01 907 3707. And most importantly, I think for this particular project, the National LGBT Helpline is available on 1890 929 539.
James O'Hagan, host and creator of Invisible Threads, thank you so much for joining me on the GoLoud Sessions.
Thank you for having me. so excited that it's finally out.
So exciting. So exciting.